Join me as we fly around the world to win 1,000,000 miles. So in October, SAS announced their Who Wants to Be a Euro Bonus Millionaire Challenge. I quickly decided I wanted to take part. You have to fly at least 15 SkyTeam carriers by December 31st. I quickly began planning potential routes, trying to figure out the best option. I had some creative names for these. I finally settled on a route, and my plans got even more detailed. I already had a flight to Helsinki, Finland that I would leverage to get me to Europe. I initially filmed a series for TikTok, which is why these videos are vertical. I also had to re-record the audio due to copyright music that I can't reuse here. But please, enjoy. We begin at about 5 a.m. in San Antonio. After a quick check-in process, we get on board. Once on board, I had a fantastic egg frittata. Overall, this was a pretty standard flight on Delta in first class. Nothing exceptional, nothing crazy. It was a bit of a small aircraft for a 3-hour flight, an A319, but not the worst. Now, this doesn't actually count towards my SkyTeam flights because I use my Delta frequent flyer number, not my SAS number. But at the end of the day, it was 5 a.m. I was tired. I had a first class seat that I would lose. So I thought, you know what? I'm just gonna keep my Delta number. Now, this flight did have the new in-sync IFE system, but was missing the Bluetooth module, so I didn't really use it. We had a rough landing and some turbulence, but LAX is always great. Of course, the best part is going to In-N-Out afterwards to watch the aircraft landing. Now, time to get ready for tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be an interesting one.
Good luck. Yeah, good luck. Thank you. I appreciate it.
After arriving at LAX, I headed directly to the flagship lounge to have a glass of champagne and try one of their pop-up salmon and avocado tostados. It was very tasty. Directly afterwards, I headed to the Qantas first class lounge for dinner. I had a delicious squid, minute steak, and pork katsu. Qantas First is really one of the nicest lounges at LAX. I also got to meet Nikki from the Points Guy, which is a really cool experience. I was allowed to be the first on board while all the other passengers remained in the boarding area, which was a bit of an interesting experience. Once on board, I had a blueberry juice, which I had been looking forward to trying. It really was delicious. We ended up being about 2 hours delayed on this one. Not the worst, not the greatest. After takeoff, I was served a delicious chicken dish that I had pre-selected. It was actually really good. Normally, I don't really enjoy chicken on airplanes. I find it to be typically a very dry, but this time it was really tasty. Right before landing, we were served a breakfast frittata, which is kind of ironic since I just had this on Delta. Overall, it was an interesting experience since we were landing at about 6 p.m. and our initial scheduled time was 4 p.m., so a frittata or a breakfast dish is a bit unusual, along with having a very late dinner. Of course, being in the north during winter, it was already dark by 6 p.m., so we were seeing all the lights as we were going into land, which was really nice. I really enjoyed the Finnair experience. The seat was interesting since it doesn't recline, but it has lots of space, and I got great sleep. I would definitely fly it again if I was able to. I was able to clear customs and immigration at Helsinki quickly and headed to my hotel. I had another early morning, getting up around 5 a.m. to head to the Helsinki airport. Even though it wasn't on my boarding card, I was able to use my Delta Elite status to early board. For the first flight, I had the exit row. A weird thing I'll never get over with SAS is that you can have free tea and coffee, but you have to pay for water on board. Once in Stockholm, I headed to the American Express lounge for a quick breakfast before heading over to the SAS lounge, which unfortunately took forever to get into. The gold section for elite flyers was being remodeled. That was annoying, but the staff suggested I head to the overcrowded, regular part of the lounge. But at least they would let me in. I then headed for my next gate to catch the flight to London Heathrow. It was very similar to the last flight, except I didn't have the exit row, so it was a bit tighter. But yeah, pretty standard flight. Once in London, I headed directly to the China Eastern check-in desk. One annoying thing about China Eastern is that it's very difficult to check in online, so I wasn't able to pick up my seat until physical check-in. Still, I was able to use the first class check-in and they assigned me an exit row, which is very nice. After a brief stop in the lounge, it was time to board the aircraft. One of my favorite benefits of elite status is boarding early. It allows me to make sure there's space for my bags as well as be one of the first people on the plane, which is fun, and the complimentary exit row doesn't hurt either. Shortly after getting in the air, we were served our first meal. It was edible, but I would say not great. And here's the second meal, which was also not great. It was actually far worse. But hey, at least there was nobody in the middle seat, which is always appreciated, especially on a long flight like this one, which was almost 12 hours. I arrived in Shanghai and went to clear the transit immigration before heading to the lounge. Now, personally, I think one of the nicest things to do after a long flight, especially when you're connecting and still have another flight to take, is take a shower. So I quickly headed into the lounge and booked a shower room. Now, you can also enjoy a nice cold beer in a shower. It's called a shower beer. I decided to have a nice Coke this time. After the shower, it was time to grab some edible food finally. They had a choose your own noodle bar, which was fantastic. I also grabbed some other food as well in the lounge. This was definitely way better than the food in the plane. They also had a TV to show you what the kitchen staff were doing, which was kind of interesting. I then spent some time watching the US election results. This was really interesting to watch, especially since I was in China behind the Great Firewall. I was using a VPN that was constantly failing just to see the results. I then had to do some plane spotting, obviously. This was my next aircraft taking me to Seoul. Turns out it's a SkyTeam livery, which is pretty cool, since I'm doing a SkyTeam challenge around the world. Then, before I knew it, it was time to board my next flight. I did not have the exit row on this one, but I did have the entire row to myself, which is pretty great. Of course, being 6'5", 6'6", there's always problems with normal legroom seats. So yeah, as you can see, I had like no space. My tray table wouldn't even go down all the way. I'm glad I grabbed food in the lounge because this food was absolutely inedible. The day started with a quick bite in the Korean Air Lounge before rushing to the gate to catch my flight. Today's a unique one because we're landing in South Taiwan and rushing up to the north to catch a flight right back to Korea. In Korea, one or more of the ground crew bow as the flight departs. How cool! This flight with China Airlines has minimal legroom as you can see, but it wasn't too long of a flight, and I had the entire row to myself. Now, I have come to appreciate how every flight in Asia has a meal served, even in economy. But before I knew it, the coast of Taiwan came into view and we had landed. Immigration took a while, but afterwards I was off to catch my train to the north with a tight connection. So after clearing immigration and rushing to the train, I had a little bit of time and found a 7-Eleven. And of course, I had to get some tasty food to eat on board. I mean, it is Asia, right? 7-Eleven here is truly elite. This was delicious. Then I settled in for a relaxing journey across the entirety of Taiwan before arriving at TPE Airport. Now, having access to the business class check-in, even in economy, is a great perk. I had quite a bit of trouble with the check-in staff and the lounge staff refusing to allow me access to the lounge, which is a perk of my SkyTeam Elite Plus status. However, I finally won the argument and had a quick bite that was very tasty before boarding my flight. It wasn't anything special, but I was glad to be in Korea again. For the final time, I popped back into the Korean Air Lounge for lunch before heading to the gate to board my next flight. This was actually the first time where they weighed my bag and told me it was overweight. Luckily, my SkyTeam Elite Plus status prevented them from forcing me to check it. The flight was quite standard with another delicious meal served. I arrived in China for my transit and went looking for the lounge, which, strangely enough, I found on the ground floor in an abandoned boarding area. The lounge had a noodle cooking station, which seems quite common here, and delicious food. Strangely enough, I had to register my passport information to get the Wi-Fi password for the lounge. Before long, it was time to head to my next flight, where I had another tasty meal before landing in Bali, which, to be honest, is going to be an adventure in itself. I woke up in beautiful Bali and wish I had more than an overnight layover. This place is amazing. But I headed to the airport to check in, and after some struggles with getting my SAS status entered, I headed to the lounge, which I really enjoyed. It was delicious, and lots of selection was available. After an hour or so, I headed off to board the aircraft. The 13-year-old 738 felt quite dated, but I did at least have a decent seat. I've been really lucky not to have anyone sit next to me on a flight so far. I tried a little of my meal and it was very good, but I was still very full from the lounge. I landed in Singapore and was unfortunately unable to get the automated gates to work at immigration. I checked into the St. Regis, which was amazing, before heading to a nightclub for the rest of the night. Okay, this might have been the most interesting day of the entire trip. I got into an argument with a Russian passenger and was denied entry into Vietnam. So, the day started in Singapore, where I visited the Changi Jewel before heading to the Qantas First Class Lounge. Yes, they aren't a part of SkyTeam, but the staff allowed me access, thanks to me being a frequent visitor. Qantas has amazing food at all of their first class lounges. I had the salt and pepper squid, a classic at Qantas, nasi lemak with beef rendang, and signature laksa with a Dom's pistachio cream puff for dessert. After eating my fill, I headed out to check out some of the airport gardens before going to clear security at my gate. I once again had an empty row to myself, but an annoyed Russian was sitting behind me and was clearly upset whenever I moved in my seat. He also didn't like me reclining. Tough luck. When we finally landed, he tried to push past me while we were waiting for the doors to open. Don't worry, I put him in his place though. My troubles, however, were not over. I had applied for and was granted an e-visa for Vietnam, but on arriving was sent to the immigration counter, where they claimed my passport number was invalid. Apparently, you're supposed to give them a bribe, but I refused. Luckily, I was not deported back to Singapore since I had a connecting flight the next day, but I had to sleep at the Vietnam Airlines rat-infested lounge. Now, this was quite the experience. I was maybe one of 4 people that spent the night there, and yeah, I mean, I'm lucky I had the lounge at least. I could have been outside in the terminal, but this was definitely one of the low points of my flying career, and I've had to spend nights in lounges before, but at least they were nicer than this one. But hey, I made it, I survived. So after that unpleasant night in the Vietnam Airlines lounge where I slept on 3 chairs, I woke up, took a quick shower. The food was good, so honestly I couldn't complain about that. Though of course I was still wary since the lounge is known for having rats. I did a little bit of plane spotting from the lounge before heading to my next gate. Now, due to my status, I was put on the short bus for business class passengers. This was probably my first time being on a short bus. I'm just kidding. I've always loved boarding from the apron. It was an almost empty flight, which I was able to spread out thanks to, which is always fantastic. After landing in Guangzhou Airport, I used the free bag storage before heading into the city for a bit of sightseeing. I have a bit of a confession. This was actually my first time leaving the airport in China and going into a city, and it was amazing. I wanted to explore Xiamen, a former European concession with beautiful architecture that would make you think you were in a Western European city and not Asia. Of course, they also had a Starbucks, which doesn't hurt. After exploring, I headed back to the airport and was shocked to see the long lines. Luckily, I was able to skip them. This is a Fifth Freedom flight that starts in Guangzhou, stops let off passengers like me in Bangkok, takes on more passengers before continuing to Kenya, which is where most of these people were headed. I've never seen so many suitcases in person. I grabbed a quick bite to eat in the lounge. For the first time, there was actually a scale prior to security where they grabbed anyone on the Kenya flight and made them weigh their bags. Mine was overweight, but luckily my status allowed me to continue. On board, everyone around me took off their shoes and were barefoot, which was quite the shock. While boarding, the person in front of me placed his bag in the overhead bin above my seat, filling it, and then kept walking to the back. I removed it and told him to take it, which prompted him to get in my face and call me very stupid. It was a unique flight for sure. I landed in Bangkok and was one of just a few passengers to get off. So after the unique flight yesterday, I wake up in the Waldorf Astoria, Bangkok with a stunning view before heading to the airport. Now, Bangkok has one of my favorite outstation lounges in the world. Air France's lounge is simply fantastic. They have a large buffet selection, good drink choices, and even macaroons in the national colors, of course. This lounge is actually also in the Priority Pass network. Super cool. I head to the boarding gate and am quickly on board. I have an entire row to myself on this mostly empty 787. Now, Saudia does have a prayer appear on the IFE before takeoff, which a lot of Middle Eastern carriers do, but this was the first time I'd experienced it on Saudia. The meal on board was okay, though I mostly slept on the 8-hour flight. And before long, we were landing in Riyadh. The next morning, I woke up in Riyadh bright and early before rushing off to the airport, where I had to wait in a long line at the premium terminal because border officials didn't like something about my boarding pass, so I had to get it reprinted. I had a quick bite to eat in the overcrowded lounge before driving out to our beautiful A321. Finally, after 13 flights in economy, I am back in business class where I belong. I'm handed a date and some warm nuts. Soon after takeoff, the meal service starts and is very substantial. They also had amazing non alcoholic drinks, which almost made up for Saudia being a dry airline. Before long, we were landing in Munich, where the two immigration officers take 30 plus minutes just to process the first two business class passengers. Luckily, I'm third and have extensive history in Germany plus an American passport, which allowed me through in just seconds. SkyTeam somehow has an ultra low cost carrier masquerading as a regular airline in their alliance. So, unfortunately, I needed to fly them. Unlike most SkyTeam carriers, I'm unable to select an exit row for free and end up in a cramped regular economy seat with no meal service. Luckily, I'm in Madrid in almost no time and head to my next flight to Milan. This terminal in Madrid is very basic, but that's fine since we spend almost no time here. Same deal on the next flight, but luckily I was in Milan before I knew it and had a couple days to relax here, do laundry, go out with friends, and just recover from what's already been 13 days of nonstop travel. So after resting for a few days, I head to Lanada Airport this time, going through the rather confusing duty-free section. I get on board my KLM flight and settle into my extra legroom economy seat, where I'm served banana bread. I love banana bread so much on KLM that I even ask for it in business class on morning flights instead of the Vonderbox, which I hate. As we descend into Amsterdam, the turbulence gets quite bad. I head to the lounge and get a quick bite in before heading to a gate, not for my next flight, but to say hello to a good friend flying through Amsterdam at the same time as me. We head back to the lounge and grab some drinks. We spend about 20 minutes catching up before I have to rush to my next flight with Air France, where I'm served a delicious cheese sandwich. Now, let's hurry up and head to our next airport. We're in the Air France lounge now at Orly Airport, which is quite small and basic. I've just come from a flight at Charles de Gaulle and took a taxi over. I begin boarding my Air France A220 and enjoy the short flight to Nice. Unfortunately, our takeoff is delayed, and I'm now at risk of missing my connection with Air Serbia in a different terminal. When we land in Nice, I rush to make my next flight, and luckily arrived to see that the line for boarding hasn't even finished. I had a tasty sandwich on the flight to Belgrade, but I'll leave my Air Serbia review for a future video. This was my first time on an ATR 72 and it was quite the experience. I will admit, listening to those engines start up was music to my ears. I decided to combine both of these due to not having much footage and them also being flown on the same aircraft type. Luckily, I had nobody next to me on either flight. I did find it interesting that the door is in the back, making business class actually the worst place to sit. After a brief flight, we landed in Sofia where our bags were unloaded right there, and we cleared immigration. I spent a short night exploring the city before taking the metro back to the airport to catch my next flight with Tehran to Bucharest. Sadly, I hardly captured any video, but it was an interesting flight, and I would love to go back and fly them again to make a full review. So after that, I headed to Poland and I spent a few days here hanging out with friends. Now, the last night I spent across from the terminal, which I'm really glad I did. It was a really convenient walk. I flew business class, obviously, on KLM, but I still got banana bread from economy because it's superior to the Vonderbox. Once in Amsterdam, I headed directly to my next gate where I got to my aircraft. I'm flying an 8 kilo, which is my favorite seat. It's the bulkhead first seat on KLM in the second cabin, which is far more private than the main cabin. After takeoff, I got served my meal, which was a delicious spicy beef dish. I spent most of the rest of the flight getting caught up on work and chatting with the crew. Before landing, there was a poke bowl served. As we landed in Austin, I'm extremely excited to be home after 24 days away and almost finished with my challenge. We start by boarding in Las Vegas, where the crew doesn't allow any filming, but it was a very standard flight. I arrive in Monterey, and after a crazy taxi ride, catch up on a few hours of sleep. I'm up after just a few hours and off to the bus depot to catch a bus to the US border to cross back into the States. Border traffic was insane. This was actually my first time doing a land crossing into the US. It was very different. Luckily, my global entry was accepted. I make it to HRL with maybe 10 minutes to spare before boarding begins. What an interesting small airport. It's absolutely crawling with federal immigration officers, but it does make sense since it's within 20 minutes of the US-Mexico border. I settle into my Delta First Class seat as we begin to pull back and then proceed to forget to film any of it. It has been a long, long day. I have a drink in the air before we begin to land on this very, very quick hop. I walk over to the Austin Delta Sky Club, which is arguably the best sky club in my opinion, just for a quick bite. Thanks for flying with me, and thanks for coming along on this adventure. It's crazy to believe, but we've finally done it. We have flown 15 SkyTeam carriers. So I had done it. 40,000 miles around the world, 22 countries, 26 if you're counting some side quests that I drove to. Now I just had to wait for my million miles, and boy did I wait. Most flights didn't auto-post, and I had to manually submit them and then wait months for them to be approved. Finally, 4 months later, I finally became a millionaire on April 10th. I had done it. Now, I just need to go spend those miles. Thanks for flying with me on this amazing adventure.